It was my 18th birthday, and my friend Anna threw a big party for me. My parents were strict, so I hadn't experienced much freedom before. Anna lent me her best dress, and I felt excited but nervous about the whole thing. At the party, I noticed Chris, who was the center of attention. He seemed confident and attractive, which caught my eye. I was too shy to talk to Chris at first, but Anna introduced us, and we started chatting. Chris was really nice and easy to talk to, despite my shyness. Eventually, we became good friends, along with Anna. We spent a lot of time together, but I kept my feelings for Chris to myself because Anna had a crush on him. Chris and Anna started dating about a year later, and I decided to give them space. But their relationship hit a rough patch when Anna cheated on Chris while she was drunk at a party. I knew about it but didn't tell Chris to protect Anna. However, he found out later and they broke up. Anna blamed me for their breakup, accusing me of telling Chris about her infidelity, which wasn't true. Our friendship ended and Anna moved away with her family while Chris went to study law in New York. Years later, after I graduated from college, I also moved to New York for work. It was there that I bumped into Chris again, unexpectedly, while he was shopping at the boutique where I worked. Seeing him again was a shock, bringing back memories of our past friendship and his past relationship with Anna. Despite the awkwardness of the situation, Chris and I caught up, exchanging stories about what we'd been up to since we last saw each other. We laughed about old times, reminiscing about our friendship and the crazy parties we used to attend. As we spent more time together, I couldn't deny the feelings I still had for Chris. It was like no time had passed since we were last close, and my feelings for him had only grown stronger. But I knew I had to be careful because I didn't want to interfere with his life or his potential relationships. However, fate had other plans. One evening, after work, Chris asked if I wanted to grab dinner with him. It started innocently enough, but as the night went on, our conversation turned more serious. Chris confessed that he still had feelings for me, feelings he'd harbored since our college days. I was taken aback by his admission, but also conflicted. On one hand, I still cared deeply for Chris, but on the other hand, I couldn't shake the guilt I felt about Anna and what had happened between them. It was a complicated situation, one that left me feeling torn and unsure of what to do next. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about Chris and what he'd said. I knew I needed to confront my feelings and the guilt I carried from the past. So I made the difficult decision to reach out to Anna and finally come clean about what had happened all those years ago. Anna's reaction was unexpected. Instead of anger or resentment, she expressed remorse for how she'd treated me and for the pain she'd caused both Chris and me. She even encouraged me to pursue my feelings for Chris, acknowledging that our friendship had been fractured by her actions, but that it was time for us to move forward. With Anna's blessing, I mustered up the courage to tell Chris the truth about how I felt. To my relief, he understood and reciprocated my feelings, admitting that he'd never been able to shake his feelings for me either. It was a moment of clarity and catharsis, one that brought us closer together than ever before. Despite the rocky start to our relationship, Chris and I were determined to make things work. We took things slow, rebuilding trust and communication every step of the way. And as we navigated the challenges of our past and the uncertainties of our future, one thing remained clear. Our love for each other was worth fighting for. In the end, our journey wasn't easy, but it was worth it. We learned to forgive, to let go of the past, and to embrace the future together. And as we welcomed our first child into the world, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together, as a family, stronger than ever before. Chris and I ran into each other unexpectedly, and the surprise on his face mirrored my own astonishment. We spent hours catching up, reminiscing about old times, and discussing the twists and turns our lives had taken. It was surreal reconnecting with my old crush, Chris, who had evolved into a successful lawyer in a prestigious firm. His six-figure monthly salary and popularity were a far cry from the days when we first met. Hailing from a wealthy family with well-known parents, Chris seemed to have it all. Meanwhile, I had carved out a career for myself as a fashion designer in a luxury boutique. Despite the demands of our respective professions, Chris always found time to visit me. Over time, our friendship rekindled, and after a year of spending more time together, Chris took the bold step of asking me out. I eagerly accepted, and our relationship quickly blossomed into something serious. We became inseparable, drawing the envy of his female colleagues. On my birthday, Chris stunned me with an extravagant gift of $500,000, a sum that exceeded anything I could have imagined. With his support, I realized my dream of opening my own boutique. Within a year, my business was thriving, and I was making plans for further expansion. As our careers flourished, so did our love. Chris proposed shortly after receiving a promotion, and I joyfully accepted, eager to embark on this new chapter of our lives together. Excited about our future, I couldn't resist sharing the news on social media, much to the delight of our friends and family. Months later, Chris surprised me again by purchasing a house and inviting me to move in. While my parents harbored traditional views and preferred we marry first, I managed to persuade them to accept our decision. Chris's parents, who shared similar values, eventually relented, allowing us to take this significant step in our relationship. Life with Chris was beyond anything I had ever imagined. He was not only caring, generous, and incredibly loving, but also treated me with unwavering devotion. Even during moments of disagreement, Chris remained composed and attentive, always willing to listen and find a resolution. Chris supported me through every challenge, including my struggles with postpartum insecurities. When we decided to start a family, his joy knew no bounds. His excitement was palpable when I shared the news of my pregnancy, and he showered me with love and attention throughout the journey. Each day with Chris felt like a blessing, and I cherished every moment we shared. Despite any doubts or insecurities I may have had, our bond only grew stronger as we prepared to welcome our baby into the world. With Chris by my side, I knew that together we could overcome any obstacle and build a future filled with love, happiness, and endless possibilities. It was never easy for me to adjust after having our daughter, but Chris was always there to support me. He made it his mission to help me regain my confidence by working out with me. Our daughter brought even more joy into our lives, making our already happy life even better. I couldn't help but share our happiness with the world, so I posted a series of pictures and videos on Instagram, showcasing our little family. However, that's when my problems started. Despite having only 1,000 followers on Instagram, the post garnered much more attention than I anticipated. Chris was quite popular, but I never expected people to take such an interest in our personal lives. If only I hadn't made those posts, perhaps I wouldn't be in the predicament I found myself in. 3 months after our daughter was born, Chris had to go on a work trip to Italy for 3 weeks. It was tough for me to part with him for such a long time, but I understood that he had to go. He had already taken time off work after our daughter's birth. The first week without him was especially difficult. I tried to focus on work and caring for our daughter, but nothing seemed to lift my spirits. I missed Chris terribly, and his absence weighed heavily on me. One day, my personal assistant noticed my mood and suggested I attend a party for a change of pace. I wasn't used to partying, but she assured me it would be a good distraction. Chris encouraged me to go, as he didn't like seeing me tired and down during our video calls. I dropped our daughter off at his mum's house before heading to the party. That night, I wore a simple black knee-length gown, not looking to attract any attention as I was already happily engaged. I only had 1 drink at the party, not wanting to overdo it. After a couple of hours, I was ready to head home and snuggle with my daughter. On my way out, I bumped into a guy named Roy, who bore a striking resemblance to Chris, except for his eyes and face. Despite the resemblance, Chris was more muscular than him. To my surprise, Roy struck up a conversation with me. We chatted for a while, and I found him to be pleasant company. However, I made it clear that I was happily engaged and not looking for anything more than friendly conversation. Roy seemed to understand and respected my boundaries. As I left the party and made my way home, I couldn't shake off the feeling of guilt. Despite not doing anything wrong, I couldn't help but feel uneasy about the encounter with Roy. I knew I needed to be honest with Chris about what happened, as transparency and trust were the foundation of our relationship. However, I couldn't help but worry about how he would react. I found myself in an uncomfortable situation when Roy insisted on buying me a drink, despite my polite refusal. He claimed to be a friend of Chris and said Chris had asked him to keep me company. Although it seemed strange that Chris had never mentioned Roy before, I trusted him because Chris was careful about the people he associated with. After a few drinks, I started feeling dizzy and developed a headache. Roy offered to drive me home, and I ended up falling asleep in his car. When I woke up, I realized we weren't at my house. Roy explained that his car had broken down, and it was too late to call a cab. Feeling tired and weak, I reluctantly agreed to go to his place. At Roy's house, he kindly gave me hot milk for my headache, which provided some relief. He showed me to a spare room to sleep in, and although I was uneasy about the situation, I tried to call Chris. Unfortunately, my phone was dead, leaving me feeling even more isolated. As I lay in bed, trying to push aside my worries, Roy knocked on my door. He was wearing only a towel and bore an uncanny resemblance to Chris, which made me feel even more unsettled. He explained that he needed to retrieve his shirt from my room, and despite my discomfort, I reluctantly let him in. After retrieving his shirt, Roy noticed that I hadn't taken a shower and offered me his shirt to wear. I declined, feeling increasingly uncomfortable in his presence. Although he seemed friendly enough, his resemblance to Chris only served to heighten my unease. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Roy's behavior seemed off, and I couldn't understand why Chris would ask him to keep me company without informing me beforehand. Despite my attempts to rationalize the situation and get some sleep, the feeling of unease lingered, leaving me restless and anxious. After Roy insisted, I decided to wear his shirt, feeling dizzy and thinking a hot bath might help. While I was in the bath, Roy entered the room without any clothes on. I was shocked and too weak to react. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching me. I eventually told him to leave. I couldn't stop thinking about Chris, my husband, and how wrong this situation felt. But then, Roy started to touch himself right in front of me. I felt confused and wrong for finding the scene both disturbing and strangely exciting, especially since I hadn't been close with Chris for a while. Roy's resemblance to Chris, combined with my state, blurred my judgment. Soon I found myself getting caught up in the moment too. It felt like a betrayal, yet in that confused state it almost seemed as if Chris was there. This mistake escalated quickly. Roy joined me in the bath and we ended up being intimate. The next morning, I woke up with a terrible realization of what had happened. My head was pounding, not just from a hangover, but from the guilt and confusion. Roy revealed he had been paid to seduce me and confessed to drugging my drink. He said his task was completed and left, leaving me alone with the weight of my actions. I couldn't believe I had consented to this, even under the influence, because the memories were vivid. The guilt was overwhelming. I had betrayed Chris, who had always treated me like royalty. The idea that someone wanted me to cheat and that I had fallen into their trap deepened my despair. Returning home, the guilt consumed me. Facing my daughter was painful. I felt unworthy of her or Chris's love. The thought of Chris finding out about my indiscretion terrified me. I didn't even have the strength to consider who might have hired Roy or why. All I could think about was the mistake I had made and the fear of losing the family I cherished. It's been a week since that night, and Chris will be home in another week. I'm tormented by the thought of facing him. I need advice on how to deal with this situation. It was an accident, a terrible mistake, but the guilt is unbearable. How do I even begin to make things right, or can they ever be? Facing a moral dilemma, I grappled with whether to tell Chris the truth about my infidelity or continue to live with the burden of my guilt. The weight of my actions tormented me, leaving me feeling utterly helpless. After much internal struggle, I ultimately chose to confess, following the advice of many who urged honesty. Upon Chris's return, I summoned the courage to disclose everything to him. His reaction was devastating. The disappointment and hurt in his eyes cut deep. Without uttering a single word, he retreated to his study, leaving me to confront the consequences of my actions alone. His prolonged silence was agonizing, but I respected his need for space, understanding the gravity of my betrayal. As Chris secluded himself in his study for hours, I found myself engulfed in a whirlwind of emotions. The weight of my guilt pressed down on me relentlessly as I grappled with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Tears flowed freely, yet I refrained from disturbing Chris, recognizing his rightful need for solitude in processing the betrayal he had endured. 2 days later, a message containing incriminating pictures of me leaving the party with Roy surfaced, along with explicit details of the events that transpired. Chris, equipped with his legal acumen, traced the message back to Anna, a friend from my past. Anna, driven by jealousy and resentment, had orchestrated the entire scheme, enlisting Roy to sabotage our relationship as retribution for what she perceived as my role in her own relationship woes. The revelation left me feeling defeated and overwhelmed by a sense of injustice. Chris, grappling with his own turmoil, requested a hiatus from our relationship, opting to move out for a period of 2 months. The ensuing days were marked by profound misery and solitude as I wrestled with feelings of remorse and despair. Yet, amidst the darkness, the presence of our daughter offered a glimmer of solace, a reminder of the love that still existed amidst the wreckage of our shattered trust. After 2 agonizing months of separation, Chris extended an olive branch of forgiveness, expressing his unwavering love and desire to rebuild what had been broken. His gesture of grace was a revelation, a beacon of hope amidst the storm of despair that had consumed me. We eventually reunited, our daughter serving as a symbol of the enduring bond that transcended the trials we had faced. Our journey toward reconciliation culminated in a joyous celebration of love, as we exchanged vows once more, with our daughter standing as the radiant embodiment of our renewed commitment to each other. In Chris's forgiveness, I found redemption, a second chance to atone for my transgressions and embrace the beauty of our shared love.